Please pardon our dust and welcome to the Coder Radio feed. Coder Radio is Jupiter Broadcasting's new show hosted by Chris Fisher, that's me, and Michael Dominic. It's our show that takes a pragmatic look at the art and business of software development. Live every Monday at 9 a.m. Pacific, that's noon Eastern, and available for download later that day. You can also contact us, coderradio@jupiterbroadcasting.com, and we look forward to seeing you every single week.
Okay, no, we haven't traveled back in time. I'm Wes, and I've, of course, joined with Mike. We do have a big announcement today, so I thought we might as well start off by reviewing how the show got started. It's been a long time since 2012, Mike.
It has been 7 years. In fact, yes, I inaccurately said it was 6 years yesterday. I forgot a year. It's been so long.
That is impressive.
So for those who don't know, I believe that was the first intro we ever did live, right?
Yeah. No, actually, so that was the warm-up for the feed.
That was the warm-up. That's right.
Yeah, and then and then I think the week after that,
we did episode 1.
The first episode dropped, right?
Right, because there was an episode 0. I forgot about that.
Yeah, and those, unfortunately, fit for this podcast. There's lots of little boring programming technical reasons there because, you need something in your feed if you're going to add it to all the places that want to check your feed.
That's true. And true coders count starting with 0 anyway.
We start at 0. We just have to.
So, big announcement. Because of my insane work schedule, it was going to be about a month hiatus. But I think Wes and I have talked, and we really accomplished the goals that Chris and I originally, and then Wes when he came on, had for the show, right? Educating new developers, getting people familiar with open source alternatives. Remember when that was a thing? You had to convince people?
Yeah, right. I mean, when the show started, sure. I mean, open source was obviously there and prevalent and used a lot of places, but it wasn't anywhere near as common, just in everyday discussion and people knowing about it in open source, both in good ways and in bad ways for things like vulnerability, being reported in the mainstream news.
Exactly. And how about open source alternatives for, remember iOS? Remember mobile?
Yeah. Oh, gosh.
That was a huge focus, yeah. So, we've accomplished our goals, and this is going to be our pop the champagne, mission accomplished.
I like that a lot. I'm honored to have been a part of the history of this show. I came on, I think, in an interesting time for the show. I first appeared in a guest episode when Chris was away. Of course, we talked about Clojure because, what else was going to happen? And then I joined on a more permanent basis just at the beginning of this year. I think that just shows, too, I was looking back at the history, reviewing some of the tags and all the things that we've, that have been covered over the years. And it really does show what has happened. We've been talking about serverless and functional programming and DevOps and automation, and all of those things have just come to the forefront in the past 7 years.
This is some ancient history here, but remember all the Android compatibility Google Play Services segments we used to have?
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
Oh, those were the days.
So I thought maybe just, we could review a few old clips from the archive and revel in the glory that is Coder Radio.
Oh, I sensed some Swift coming.
Well, yeah, in a minute. Let's warm up, though. Let's warm up with your very first feedback answer. Because you know what, honestly, one of the things I've loved about doing the show is we get great audience engagement. And that's why we're here at all, right? Is because there's an awesome audience who we love to converse with. And part of the way that happens is, sending feedback to us. So here's your advice to the very first Coder Radio feedback.
All right, why don't we do our first feedback I see you have here. I'll let you take it.
Sure. So first off, thank you all for your emails. There were quite a lot of them, and many of them were rather lengthy.
Yeah.
So for the sake of time, I've boiled them down into the 3 most common either requests or topics. The first one is from someone named Brett, and a few others echoed the same thing. For a beginner looking to get employment, what would be the best programming language / platform to study? Now, I totally understand why this is a question that might concern you greatly, but actually, the internet didn't get any smaller. There is tons of code that needs to be written. So pick one that you like, that's reasonable. So don't pick VBasic 6.
Right.
And, or Fortran. And just study it, get some code samples, and start looking for a job. I know that's not what you want to hear.
Right.
But honestly, you don't need to say, oh my God, mobile's hot, I have to go learn Android.
Okay.
Whatever you like, as long as it's Ruby.
Yeah, I don't believe you. I don't believe you when you say that. What about like how do you know how would you say you could get a good feel if something's dying off? Like okay, so maybe there's some languages that are sort of at the end of their usefulness, but people are still kind of current in them, like they're still semi-popular, but you could tell 5 years down the road they're kind of going to be diminished.
So dying off is actually probably not a good way to put it. It's not like an old version of Ubuntu that no one's going to run.
Right.
Fortran, as someone in the chat is pointing out, and the older languages do still get used.
Right, true.
But they're used in settings that a junior level programmer wouldn't be in. Academics, very high level banking type things. Uh-huh. If you were a junior person, I would go with something higher level and more modern.
Okay. All right, that makes sense.
And it also, it depends on your area. So I know in the New York area, Ruby is huge. Mm-hmm. Mobile's huge. Java's huge. Actually, you know what? Just learn anything you like and go for it.
As long as it's not VB6.
As long as it's not VB6, and that's just because you'll cry. And I don't want you to be sad.
Remember, we just covered the last episode, though. They're gonna support that thing for like ever.
With their dying breath, I'm sure.
Oh boy, hasn't a lot changed since that clip. I mean, one, thankfully we don't talk about VB6 anymore. But you know, I really liked your comparison to like an Ubuntu distribution that just sort of disappears after it's out of its support lifecycle, or for the most part. I mean, we all have seen those horrible Debian 4 boxes that are lurking out there somewhere. But you're right. I mean, by and large, while programming languages fade, so far they don't really just disappear. At least not the big ones.
Episode 1, I'm recommending Ruby, right? What did we talk about last week? Ruby.
I love it.
Rails 6.
Right? I mean, we keep hitting on the discussion, the theme of like, oh, you know, is Rails doing okay? Like, people aren't talking about it this much. And that's true. It's definitely lost some hype, but it's still powering major websites and getting used to in new deployments all the time.
Absolutely. And I just want to comment. I sounded so like young and terrified in that clip.
Yes, right? You're like, oh my gosh, I'm putting my voice out on the internet, and now, I mean, you're an old hat at it and come across much more sophisticated. Let me just say.
Thank you. That's a compliment coming from you. You're a suave. You're like Casey Kasem of tech podcasting.
Oh, thank you. I wondered, do you still feel the same way about not worrying about language as much, and that you sort of just need to pick a decent first learning language? Don't try to go focus on wherever the hot new area is and just get the basics in?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think one of the interesting things about looking back 7 years ago is we have covered a lot of the fads, right? Many of them were indeed just fads that went away. Yeah, I mean, every option, every language I mentioned that, even the VB6 dig with the joke was kind of wrong anyway, right? Because there are people doing VB6 and we should pray for them.
I don't know if I've said this, but VB6 was like one of the first languages I really started using. Like when I was first getting into programming, I tried to make a online multi-user dungeon in VB6. Yeah, right, because that was all the rage. That was a fad at the time.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in a certain age bracket like we are, VB6 was pretty much what you did.
You know, it still has a lot of leverage. Like if you think back about making the apps, like what you needed to know and how much you were able to do graphically. And then, of course, pop into the code view when you needed to do something a little more complicated. It was very accessible and like got me excited in a great way. And I don't know if there's anything that's out there that is exactly doing that in the same way these days.
Yeah. No, I can't think of anything quite like that. I mean, because VB6 didn't force you to kind of learn a bunch of abstract concepts up front.
No, but it is the first time I really got grips on what like a subroutine was, at least in a way that was like fully realized.
Yeah, so I like how we're having a conversation about how wonderful VB6 is. It just goes to show you that the advice from the first episode of do whatever you like, you'll find something. Hell, even if it's VB6.
All right, well, one thing that's changed a lot over the years is the rapid adoption of containers. First, maybe starting out in, things like build environments, developer setups on their desktops or their workstations, to now just being, everywhere. I'm running most of the things I run on my day-to-day in a container. You guys, Chris, though, you were on the ball on this. You saw it coming. I don't know that you'd, really adopted it full scale at this point, but you knew enough that was going on. You had your hand on the pulse and had the people from dotCloud, if you remember dotCloud, on the show to talk about what's the deal with Docker.
Ben, maybe you wouldn't give us just a real quick summary of what dotCloud is, what you guys do, and what Docker is.
Yeah, well, I'm Ben Golub. I'm CEO of dotCloud, which is the company behind Docker.
And I'm Andy Rothfuss. I'm the developer support manager for the dotCloud platform as a service. And I'm also the chief maintainer of the Docker documentation. So I've got a foot in both camps.
Well, guys, it's great to have you both. Okay, so who wants to take the what is Docker and how does it relate? How does Docker and dotCloud sort of exist together? Is it? I know Docker is an open source project, right? But you guys sort of are the shepherds of it, correct?
Right. Yeah. So we were running a platform as a service company, and platform as a service basically makes it easier for developers to get their ideas up and running in production. And the thing that we noticed as we were running this platform as a service company is that developers were, even with a great service like ours, were still spending far too much time worrying about whether their code would run in-house, whether it would run on different clouds. And so they're worried about how the code is going to run rather than worrying about creating awesome code. And so we took a lot of the core technology that we had in running our platform as a service and released it as open source. And that's the Docker project.
And that's the Docker project. I don't think any of us using Docker today think about it in those terms anymore.
Yeah, remember, so I had to look it up before the show. dotCloud was a platform as a service company, right? They basically, and they of course created Docker, and they kind of backed into being what's now I think it's called Docker Inc. or Docker Corp.
Right.
That was just a lucky call because my thinking was we should have these guys on because deployment is terrible, right? I only saw it in a very narrow view of like, you have to learn all these different tools, and depending on what you're deploying, your deployment tools are going to be different.
Right. Capistrano, anyone?
Capistrano, right? You could be doing Ansible, right? There's a million different things. If you're in the Microsoft world at the time, you were probably doing Team Foundation Server and the TVS deployment.
Right. Oh, man. Yeah, of course.
And I wasn't even using it yet, right? Because it was so like new that you could have a standard container, which we throw that word around so much, but this was really a new concept.
Right. I mean, if you were really hip, you'd been using Solaris or maybe one of the BSDs and you had a concept of something like this, Like
jails.
Right. Or maybe you come from the old mainframe days. But for the most people out there in writing enterprise software, this just wasn't a thing you had access to. It was either VM set up for you or maybe you're still on bare metal.
Yeah, maybe you're just, I mean, people used to rsync their code up to the server, right? Like crazy things have happened.
Yes.
But I don't know. I mean, Wes, I wonder what you think listening to that. Did you ever think it would grow into what it's become with like Kubernetes and Doku and all those other kind of things built on containers?
I was, I get excited about new software things fairly easily. I think that's probably obvious. So it's no surprise that I was pretty interested in it. I am impressed to the extent that it has managed to penetrate so far. I think the combination of the advancement of DevOps principles probably helped because honestly, I kind of saw a lot of older school sysadmins who didn't need that, or didn't think they needed it, didn't see the advantages, saw it as being a big sell to the developers and not a clear sell to them. And to some extent that can be true today, depending on the environment. But the value of standardization, and I think the thing that first stood out to me is I was prototype using it, for like my own local development. And this is still something I enjoyed today. To get your Docker working, I mean, you can build it in a more interactive way, but that's mostly discouraged. So you have to go figure out how to make your app run, right? Like I know that it takes 268 megabytes of Ubuntu dependencies to go get the Ruby environment up that I needed with all the, with all the build essential stuff so that it can actually go and compile native modules. Because for some reason, I have to install Nokogiri.
Because Nokogiri does everything.
Once you get it set up, it works, right? And it's all documented. You can see the packages that are required. You can see any of the steps to facilitate getting that container up and running and working with the code. So once that's done, you can go back and focus on what you're actually doing, which is probably writing an application to serve your customers.
Yeah. I mean, I remember in the early days of, because containers were really just Docker, right? And I know BSD people will be like, we have jails. But I remember long conversations with clients trying to explain the difference between a container and a VM, right? Because at the time, a VM was like the most analogous thing, and container was just not a word you used.
No, certainly not. And it didn't make much sense, even though in some ways maybe it's the simpler idea, simpler primitive. I don't know. I'm curious, there's a couple other times in the show that we've touched on containers, well, more than a few. one of the earlier ones, I don't have a clip, unfortunately, but it was an episode where you started talking about how you started adopting containers in some of your like build pipelines and test workflows. And I'm curious to what extent you find containers used, in your practice today.
I mean, I will say I use it less than I used to, but it's been a long time. But for certain types of environments where it's just picky and I want to make sure it's quick for me to, literally pull down the environment I want, I will create like a Docker container that I can pull out of either Docker Hub or a private registry.
Sure.
I almost feel like that use has almost been completely superseded, and I know it's not a perfect analogy, but by things like Flatpaks or the name Snaps. I mean Snaps.
Right. At least for things on the desktop. I don't know.
Yeah, for desktop, like tooling and stuff like that. For the server, I still pretty heavily use Doku, which is a open source implementation of the Heroku deployment API. I think Heroku now has more stuff that Doku doesn't clone.
Right.
But the idea is you don't have to pay Heroku's, somewhat inflated costs, right?
I see. Right. So you can manage it, do more of the management yourself, but still get a lot of the same sort of workflow that you expect from something like Heroku.
Yeah, and that's all Docker under the hood. So if you go into it, if you do like it's Doku enter the name of the application, all it gives you is Docker containers. That I still commonly use, but other than that, I've kind of backed off. I think we had a little bit of a container fever, let's say.
Oh my gosh, I gotta containerize everything.
Right. I think we actually had an episode called "Containerize All the Things." Right.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. It's interesting. Doku on their GitHub describes themselves as a Docker-powered platform as a service that helps you build and manage the lifecycle of applications. So it's funny that that's almost exactly the use case that Docker started for, and it's still fulfilling that need today, just no longer under dotCloud. All right. Well, you mentioned it at the top of the show, Mike, and we really couldn't do this episode if we didn't talk about this, and it's kind of the language elephant in the room. So you've had many opinions on Swift over the years. I thought I'd just highlight one. I kind of enjoyed this little clip, and I think you will too.
So I've been secretly toying with Swift. Not so secretly, since I've mentioned it at least a dozen times on the show.
And on Twitter.
I go through different stages of discuss / okay, well, that makes sense. Right now, I'm in love with the guard keyword, which is a really stupid thing to like. But for those who don't know, a guard is basically if not. So it's like guard object is null or whatever, right? Because that's a pretty common pattern, right? You just got to make sure something isn't null. Super common in Objective-C. But I still, how can I say this? On a greenfield project where you're going from file new, I would be willing to say, assuming now with Swift 2, yeah, go ahead and use Swift. I would probably use Swift 2 now. But
really,
anything that is already written where you need to tie into existing code, I still don't think that bridging is good enough. And I really, really don't. I want to walk this back a little bit. I would not be super willing to take, let's say if Mercedes-Benz hired Buccaneer to do an app, I'm not sure that I would, make their project a Swift project. I don't know. I like my programming languages like I like my Scotch. Old enough to order its own Scotch.
Yeah, isn't that great? And I mean, I think I can appreciate the sentiment there as we were just talking about with container fever. Sometimes, you can jump on things too soon and, well, you're going to run into problems.
Yeah, Swift is actually like an interesting thing. I'm glad you brought it up because when Swift first came out, it really had a ton of issues, right? Xcode would keep crashing because the Swift, people can look it up. I think there was a performance issue in how Xcode integrated with the Swift compiler. But it took them really until version 2 to get decent. And now I think it's version 5. It's, I would say Swift has pretty impressively grown and become a top tier language. Although what's interesting is I was so impressed with the guard statement. And I didn't make the connection that it's basically unless in Ruby.
Oh yeah, you're right. You did miss that. Come on, Mike.
I did miss it completely. I just didn't,
An opportunity not to talk about Ruby?
I know, what?
So I am curious, right? You kind of came out against Swift when it was first launched, or at least some of the things that Apple was doing. Let's say you had some healthy skepticism about it. I wonder, are you using it much? How have your opinions changed over the years?
So this is kind of getting back to like things that have changed. Mobile is just not that big for me right now. In fact, I don't currently have. I have one mobile project, very small, just an update to an old app. I am really not doing any iOS development.
Wow, yeah, that is a big change, and I'm sure that talks about some underlying industry trends as well. We kind of all got app fever in the same way we got container fever, right? Like everyone had to be writing an app. That's where all the excitement was and a lot of money. And of course, it's still a marketplace today, but it's not the same.
It's not the same. And especially as the other trend here is maybe a more positive trend. The sophistication of what you can do with just straight up the DOM in JavaScript has really eliminated the need for a lot of things to be native mobile apps.
That's a very good point. The web has gotten better. I mean, many times apps, fully native, very well done native apps can still be, pretty nice, well integrated.
Oh, for sure.
But you're right. By and large, I mean, probably half the ones I use on a day-to-day basis are pretty much just a web view.
Yeah, particularly for line of business software, right? You don't, if you don't need glitz and glamour for like public-facing or consumer-facing user experience, geez, I would say in the last 3 years, it has been hard for me to recommend, even to prospective clients, doing a native app, because most of what they want done in a standard kind of internal business app is easier done as a web service or as a PWA if you want to get really fancy.
Mm-hmm. And then you can still, of course, optimize for mobile clients, but you can be a more general service.
Yeah, and then you don't have to deal with setting up MDM. See, even the mobile stuff's starting to fade. Yeah, and doing like enterprise certificates,
which that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, how many hours did I talk about how horrible code signing was?
Oh my, yes, and having to have special machines set aside just for doing Apple build pipelines.
Yep,
what a mess.
It was, if you lost I remember the Android certificates, the publication ones, if you lost the certificate file, you had to delete your app off the store to replace it.
I mean, I suppose there are perhaps some reasonable security guidelines there, but it is quite the draconian environment. I'm also curious, Mike, one thing we've spent a decent amount of time talking about, but haven't talked about yet today, is the .NET platform, right? I mean, in your tenure, you've seen that platform open up. You've seen it advance, get faster. I mean, just earlier this week, we were talking about some stories about some neat ways to do, like fast native code running from .NET. Are you using that more? I know you've recently been talking F# like nobody's business.
I have seen some disturbing things done with old .NET and Access, and I'm very aggressively trying to move those people to .NET Core. I think the whole Microsoft, even taking it outside of .NET trend over the time we've done the show has been one of the things that has surprised me the most.
Microsoft loves Linux, Mike, don't you know? They're an open source development company.
In 2012, if you told me that, I would have said, all right, well, he's crazy, right? Like that is not happening. And now, I mean, they're on the Linux Foundation board, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, they're all over the place. Yeah, they have their own Linux distribution, maybe several in some views.
How about like Windows subsystem for Linux? A Linux kernel in Windows 10?
Mm-hmm. They've been, made contributions to the kernel to help it run better on their cloud, which is also mostly runs Linux. It's it kind of plays back into, we at the top of the show, we were talking about how you had to remind people about open source at the start. And these days, I mean, you don't, right? Open source is now something that you'll see in like formal business reports.
Yeah, I think a really like succinct way to think about that is when we started the show, most of business executives you would deal with you'd have to justify using this, crazy open source project. Now you have to justify doing anything proprietary.
Yeah, right. Why do we need to buy this library? I mean, isn't there like an open source project we can use?
Right. Like in that, like just the concept of buying a library is even to me is like, no. It's come a long way. Now, I don't know. So what do you see the trend forward for in terms of Microsoft and open source?
It's a good question. I'm not quite sure where we're going to go from the inflection point we're at now is. We've seen, the large rise of services. So it's not like the proprietary aspect has gone away. I think it's more of a realization from many players, for good and bad reasons, that raising the level at where you start to add your level of, new value, your value add layer, raising that up can be useful, because it turns out there is a lot of stuff that we all do share, the same problems, and we don't all need to rate our own container orchestrator, right? So we can share more of the things and get along. But we have also seen a shift from, the reliance on doing this yourself, piecing together open source tools, to now that's mostly done by, big corporations who've abstracted that and presented it to you as a proprietary service. Yes, it's still powered by open source, and open source is doing well. I don't know that we've fully reckoned with that, and I'm not sure if that's going to change anytime soon.
In a way, there is a lot of influence, I think, of bigger corporations on open source than at least I ever thought there would be, right? But it's not necessarily bad, right? Because your Microsofts, your Red Hats, so I guess it's now IBM, the big companies, frankly, fund a lot of this work that desperately needs to be done, right?
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, there's no question that we're still, we're still benefiting from that. I think it's, at this point, it's almost like a cultural value. And now that we're more aware of it, just making more decisions about where we draw those lines and to keep talking about it.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like my favorite project, GNU Step.
Oh boy,
which is the object. Remember that?
Yes, I do.
My biggest achievement on the show, the thing I'm proudest of, is getting you to use GNU Step.
Honestly, it was a lot of fun, and that's something I'm going to remember very fondly. Really, us trying a whole bunch of languages, that has been great, and I kind of just want to keep doing it in my spare time. From time to time, just picking things up, just keeping that pace going.
Yeah, I might too.
I gotta say, even when we're trying things like GNU Step, it makes you think more. It opens your mind, and it keeps you mentally flexible, and that's a huge benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just looking at Clojure was like mind-bending for me, but in a good way, right? So.
Yeah, exactly. Even if you're not going to like switch to that or whatever, right? You just start thinking about things in a different way. You practice using your brain and working through a problem in another way, and that can only be a good thing. And I think that, it was a nice kind of way to wrap things up too, because, as you talked about, like helping out new programmers, providing some fundamentals, and by the end here, we'd kind of moved on a little bit, not really, but in the sense of we'd all grown as a community and sort of went and looked over the hill at all the other fun things that we can go spend time with.
Yeah, it's so true. Yeah, I mean, it's been really interesting just jumping from language to language and watching some technologies go and others come. I mean, the whole functional programming, I know this existed since the 70s, but that really just picked up in the last couple of years. And I definitely think that's more like if, you are that new programmer who wrote in on episode number 1, definitely take a look at some functional concepts, even if you are writing in a Java or a C#. How about safety in languages, right? Swift, Rust, that's become a huge gain.
Absolutely, yeah. At the start, right, I think we're kind of still all in the dynamic object-oriented phase, the Rubies and the Pythons, and now it's, right, I mean, statically typed, at least partly functional languages are pretty much the norm.
Yeah, and the concept of the language preventing you from making silly mistakes. I think that's something that is a really positive trend.
IDEs, right? We've gotten to expect more in terms of functionality and interface with the compiler, and also I think in some ways moved to expecting less in other areas, right? We've seen the rise of stuff like VS Code, which is otherwise a somewhat lighter environment, but very functional and can play nicely with a huge variety of languages. And it's from Microsoft, hitting our previous point.
And you can install it as a snap package on Linux. So there you go.
Oh boy, isn't this a rat's nest?
Yeah, this is just, oof. I remember we started the show, Sublime Text, right, was the IDE of choice. People were buying IDEs.
Yes.
Now that's, I mean, not that people still can't buy IDEs. I use JetBrains.
Right. I mean, JetBrains is doing fine.
Oh man, things have changed, and you know what? I think the future looks great. My little hope and prayer is that Rust will continue to take over the world. I'm half kidding, but I do see as a language to watch the next year. I think we're going to see a lot of projects, eschew C++ in favor of Rust for some of those safety reasons.
Right. I mean, it's also, they've also brought in nice sort of dependency management. I know there's some issues about dependency bloat, et cetera, maybe.
Yeah, and cargo. Yeah.
But it's, it's first class. It's nice. It's modern. And you're finally seeing, as Rust stabilizes more, you get more of the async stuff in and maybe green threads down the line, whatever you're going to have as conveniences. There's also more and more, web frameworks and libraries and toolkits and helpers that are being built. So I think Rust will also become more accessible to people that, maybe you haven't played in quite that low level of a space before and you need a little bit more of help from the language.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, maybe we talk about it almost every week, so it's I can't say it's undercovered, but I feel like a lot of people aren't taking Rust seriously enough, and it's going to be one of those things where you're really missing out on making your, just your code really just more stable, right?
Better to find and easier to reason about.
Thank you. Almost like Clojure.
All right. I mean, what else can I say? But Mike was right.
Oh, I love it. So, what's next for Wes? I know you're rocking all the Linux stuff.
Yeah, I mean, JB's up to. We're doing all kinds of stuff. So, if you listeners out there have not yet checked out linuxheadlines.show, we're now doing a weekday, every weekday, 3 minutes or less. All the Linux headlines you need to know about for the day, No longer do you need to go out and trawl through all the various feeds out there. Don't worry, we've done it for you in a tight little package.
So I'm not supposed to play favorites, but now I can. That is by far my favorite show on the network, and it just came out because it's fast. I can have my cup of coffee and I get, just the facts, right? What do I need to know?
Right. I love that as it's the perfect amount of time when you're not quite ready to go into your meeting or switch to your next task. Maybe it's between Pomodoros, and it's just there to fill the gap and keep you entertained.
Yeah, it's really, really cool.
Well, Mike, I know we're all going to want to keep, following, talking, hanging out with you. Probably Twitter's the best place, right?
Yes, I'm a very active tweeter at Dumanuco. Now, I will say I'm going on vacation tomorrow for 2 days.
Well deserved.
Yep, I'm actually going to Star Wars Land.
Oh, really? Oh.
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
To bond with Jar Jar.
Me and Jar Jar are starting a new show. We call it Real Basic with Jar Jar. I'm kidding. Do not take that seriously. Yeah, I can already see people. Where's the Jar Jar show?
Yeah, when's it coming out?
Yeah, no, I am. I have some high expectations for this. So I hope Disney doesn't disappoint me on this one.
Yeah, let's hope so. You've also got a pretty great and handy blog going too. Where can people find that?
DominicM.com. Yeah, I need to start posting again.
Beautiful. I know I'll be checking it out. And please do, because, you've handed out some great information there over the years.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Yep. And all right, guys, it's been fun. And always remember, Objective-C was the best language anyone has ever invented.